Welcome back to Story Deep Dive with Dana and Rachel. We are back at it again, and we are still talking about Dead Until Dark by Charlaine Harris.
Nailed it.
Listen,
Killing it.
You know what, y'all got to get affirmation on on how to pronounce these names. And this is the wrong book to butcher because there are so many French names because it's based in Louisiana. But our discussion today is going to center on characters, and we have so much to talk about when it comes to this story. But before we get into that, Rachel, what is going on in your story cipher world?
Well, never minding the fact that all night long, I've been a little bit under the weather. I've been a little bit sick. And so I wasn't sleeping well, and I stayed up all half through the night. And all I could think about was how I butchered my introduction of myself in our very first episode. I kid you not. I was lying awake in bed, and all I could think about was, Rachel, you had your website, every other time you've introduced yourself, you have expressed that the core purpose of Story Cipher as a business is to solve the unique problems that crime and fantasy writers face. What were you thinking when you introduced yourself and you're like, hi, my name's Rachel, and I write on Substack, I run Story Cipher, and I play video games? Like, why? Why was that? Why? Rachel, why? So never minding the fact that I have been tormented and haunted by my own mistakes in the middle of the night, and it's actually on that note. So I've just brought on some new clients recently, which I'm really excited about because they are fantasy clients, and they are, what's interesting, what I love about working with fantasy in particular is you get clients who approach storytelling from different angles, because fantasy, you have to navigate, you're looking at, is there magic? Building out a world, building out potentially a society, you have governments, you have economics, you have all of these things that you can tailor make in your fantasy. And everybody approaches that differently. And so having writers who start and they have a plot, but they don't know the world they want to set it in, or they have a magic system, but they haven't decided yet how they want to build a world that sort of reflects the realities of this magic system. So every time I work with a new fantasy writer, I get to find out where they're starting and then help them build the remaining pieces. And that is so fun. Because I come from anthropology. I am, this, Dana, the reason you keep me around is because I'm good at asking questions. We get in there, we ask some questions, and we start building and playing. And it's so fun because every single writer is different. So that's what I've been working on is, just working with some of my new writers to build their worlds while developing their plots and making sure those things are in sync. And I'm just having a good old time because what's not to love about that? So I'm haunted, but having a great time. What do you got going on over there, Dana? What's new?
First of all, I'm over here trying to make sure that I don't break my neck because I got the church nod going on. As you're talking the whole time, my head is nodding. I'm like, Dana, that's probably not the wisest decision for a whole entire podcast, but it's whatevs. So over here, well, right now, y'all, we've told you, we record these out of order. So who knows? My brain is not tracking time, but we're preparing for a new workshop that's called The Love Equation. And I'm excited about it because I'm talking about the dynamics of building romantic couples and, the things that you should think about and consider. So while I've been thinking about this and sort of carrying it with me for the past couple of weeks, my coach is getting on me about not posting on social media. So I'm posting on social media and I'm like, what in the world do you do? What do people do when they're posting all the time? And so just talking about characters and talking about why we love them and talking about why they're different in romance and how we get beyond the surface and really get to the essence of who they are. And that's been a lot of fun. And of course, I would have thought about it anyway, even if I wasn't recording and posting all the time. but being able to sort of wrap my mind around it and then deliver it in a way that's going to help people take that information and turn it into something that's practical. And of course, because we're talking about characters in this sense, but I feel like, it's my jam, but there's so many nuances and there's so many things that you could do. So how do you distill it down to the big takeaways? And so that's what I've been thinking about over here on top of preparing for it and having a great time reading and recording this podcast. And so, listen, I feel like it's like content, and then read, and then write, and then content.
Thank goodness for the read and write in between the content, because I feel like that's what's keeping us afloat over here.
Oh my goodness. Let me tell you, if it was up to me, y'all would think where is she? What is she doing over there? She's so quiet. That would be my whole entire life. I would be reading, writing, and quilting. But, be that as it may.
And I'd be hiding in your quilting basket under your desk, and I would just be like, wherever I can get, I'm going to get in where I fit in, right? Wherever Dana will let me in, I'm going to just squeeze right on in. And that's where I would be. It'd be me, it'd be you and my husband, and I'd never have to emerge from my cave, and it'd be great.
Come on. So somebody needs to hit the lottery, because what's going to happen? Because we will be vacating and reading books, okay? That is what we will do. So with that said, y'all, we are going to get into this podcast because characters are so vital to this story. Every story, and which is why we have a standalone episode about it. And so to get us started, I am going to read it's a summary. Y'all just got to rock with it. So here we go. It's like, just rock with it, okay? Sookie Stackhouse is a small town waitress in Bonton, Louisiana, who has lived her entire life feeling like an outsider due to her telepathic abilities. Her ability to hear people's thoughts has made her relationships difficult, leaving her isolated and longing for connection. Meeting Bill Compton, a vampire whose mind is silent to her, changes everything. As the story unfolds, Sookie becomes entangled in the supernatural world, forcing her to navigate romance, danger, and the dark truths about her town. So, as we jump into this discussion, I know, gotta thank old Chat GPT. Listen.
Shout out to Chat GPT.
My friend and yours. Okay. So as we jump into this conversation about characters, we were preparing and kind of going over some of our notes before we started. And I found it fascinating that you could even tell in our notes the sort of areas and the type of work that we do, that mine is really strongly connected with the love interest and secondary characters. And then of course victims would be in there, but for you it's like the victims and the suspects. And so tell us a little bit about some of the characters or character groups that you would like for us to consider and talk about, but also that writers would really be benefit from diving into in this story.
Yeah, so of course we're going to talk about Bill and Sookie, right? Our two main characters, our love interest, Sookie, our, investigator. But also, and this is something that was so fascinating to me when I went back and read this book again, and I became so aware of the way that this, and I said this in the plot episode, the way that because this book is a serial style series, it affects every single decision of this book. It affects absolutely everything. So I have my characters grouped into, so first we have the suspect pool, which is just an interesting phenomenon in itself because of the type of story we're in. We have the victims, but we also have, and the recurring cast. I want to talk a little bit about the recurring cast as well, because it's not anything like what we see in Things We Never Got Over. It's an unbelievable contrast to that novel, because it is a serial style and it is gonna expand out into, I think the whole series has like 10 books or something like that in it. But also, we have a very important category, which I have titled The Suitors. Because we are in a serial, and because I am 1,000 years old in my heart of hearts, I want to talk about the different love interests and the way we get introduced to them and why it's important, again, in the overall setup of a book like this. So those are kind of the categories that I'm working with and that I want to dive into. What categories of characters and like what were you looking at when you were looking at characters and how writers should be thinking about characters for this book?
First of all, I really love, I can't wait to talk about yours because what you guys would have already seen. If you haven't listened to the plot one, go back and listen to the plot because characters coming after it is just a natural progression of that. I really wanted to look at the protagonist and really being clear that it is like a single protagonist in this case. And then, of course, the love interest with Bill. Talk a little bit about the fact that I don't call them Suitors. However, I do have an opinion about why calling them that would be an important distinction or, not distinction. An important note because it is a serial. So I want to talk about, I hope I don't forget that. And also the victims and how those victims and how Sookie, our protagonist, saw the victims and saw herself in the victims is so important for me. And so, I think some of the other things that you talk about we'll cover too, but it was sort of like 4 or 5 people that were really crucial. And then everyone else adds an undercurrent to the overall story, of course. But those are the ones that I will probably spend the most time with, and how everyone else helped to sort of either sharpen those elements in them or to uncover, right, some of their flaws and some of the things that they're wrestling with. I would say probably in closing, and we may not get to it because of time, but also looking at it in a sense of, in this story, the fact that you have humans and then you have vampires and then you have this potential for others, right? And almost like the dynamics between those people groups, because that is important. Not just in the building of it, because I think that is a lot looser of a context, but how it sort of is almost like glue for our plot and our characters. And so, yeah, that's what I have, and I'm looking forward to it. So I think because of the way that we've talked about this in our plot episode, I think starting off with Sookie would be helpful, and then maybe going into some of those other groups that you had would be important before we kind of get to more in depth with Bill, maybe. But we can totally wing that. So let's start off with Sookie. I think it's important to talk about like how she sees herself, and you definitely tell me if you want to go a different way. Sookie, we enter this story where Sookie is already like my vampire, and we know that this is a love story, but it quickly lets us know that this is not just a love story, because he's a vampire and she's a human, but Sookie is not, air quote, normal, right? And that's a part of what she's wrestling with as she navigates the world. And it also is this direct contrast to what she thinks she's attempting to do, right? She thinks she's doing everything that she can to be normal, right? To come off as normal, close off her mind so she doesn't dip into people's thoughts, which is taking a lot of her strength and who she is, and like to try to navigate that. Also, the fact that she's picked this job because it doesn't require a lot of her, and it allows her to still be a vital part of the community and be seen as a vital part of the community, while at the same time a little bit skirting and running from some of the I loved when you said obstacles and opportunities, the obstacles that she experienced as a person with this gift that cause her to have issues with learning and being in a traditional learning environment. And so this job sort of keeps her from having to sort of deal with that. And I think also the fact that it sort of puts her in the center. We don't know where Marlowe's is located in Bonton, but we know that everybody comes through here, whether they're coming during the day to get a light bite or they're coming at night to get a drink. We also know that they gather here when stuff is going on in town and they need to sort of whisper and chat about it. So it sort of puts her in the sort of center place when it comes to not just the town, but the whispers, if you will, of what's going on in this town. And so anything you want to add to that? Because I know I can go on and on about her.
Yeah, so the thing that I think is what am I going to say? The thing that's really important that happens in this book, and I think is essential. I'm just going to keep talking about how this is a serial because it's the thing that I couldn't get over. Speaking of things we never got over, this being a serial is at the top of that list. This, I think, the arc that Sookie needs to go on in this book is coming to terms to some extent with her power. And it's the perfect, this arc for her is really quite perfect because when we meet her at the very start, she knows she's telepathic and she, just like you said, she's struggling to try to fit in, to try to be normal and to deal with the fact that she has this ability and it makes people think she's crazy. And through her interaction with Bill, so this is both inside of the crime where it becomes an opportunity that she's able to use, and it's something that attracts Bill to her and her to Bill, so we're kind of getting these things weaving in. It enables her to start to come to terms with her gift, which is important because it is going to make her a vital part of the supernatural community. And her involvement in the supernatural community is the subject of the remaining books in the series, right? So putting her into the mix of the crime story and showing how she's learning to use her gift, how Bill is helping her reconceptualize her gift, how she's able to use it in the investigation of the crimes. It's positioning her so that by the end, she hasn't fully sussed out all of the nuances of her gift. She hasn't fully mastered it. That would be too much, I think, for just one book. But she is a little more secure and she understands it a little bit better. And her gift has put her on the map to other supernatural creatures in the world because it's something that they're interested in and something that they can use. And so her kind of going on this journey with her gift specifically gives us the springboard that we need for the rest of the books, where she is about to get involved in all kinds of supernatural hijinks because of what her gift enables her to do. But it's also showing, we also kind of get this establishment of Sookie as a person who is, she's craving some interest in her life, which makes her make certain kinds of decisions, like eagerly pursuing to get to know a vampire because she's just been craving something interesting. And also this kind of combination of naivete and bravery that gets her involved in stuff she has no business getting involved, right? Like chapter 1, the rat trays are trying to attack Bill and she's like, hey, you can't do that. And she just fires right in there, right? And she is like, what, 5'5", she's not specifically strong or specifically anything. She's just like, hey, you shouldn't do that. And she just kind of throws herself into the mix. And this is setting us up for the kind of person that we're going to see Sookie be and the kinds of ways that she's, again, going to help people and get herself into scrapes along the way. And I think all of those are essential pieces for setting up a serial. And so I just want to say, as kind of when you're thinking about writing a serial style series with a single protagonist, and we're going to stay in Sookie's point of view the whole entire series. We are not going to deviate from her POV. So you want to think about establishing kind of the groundwork that you're going to need to open up the world for your protagonist to explore and get into hijinks and adventures, but also making sure you're starting to open up the world, but you're not giving us everything all at once, because that's part of the appeal of the serial, is getting to explore different facets of the world. And you also want to leave enough room for the protagonist to grow a little bit, have some new experiences. If they have a gift, that they're going to kind of get to explore more about their gift in different ways and in different scenarios, because you need to leave yourself essentially a lot of room for your serial series to have stuff to do and things to explore and ways for your protagonist to sort of experience the world in new ways and grow even just a little bit along the way, to keep that narrative momentum and to keep that interest in the story as a whole. That was a whole lot of something. I mean, your turn.
It was a little bit, but it was good something. I want to go back just a little bit, because I kind of had a question, but what you're saying is absolutely correct. The question that I have first is, when you said, like this journey, right? Because we're talking about characters, and she's the one where we are experiencing all of this through her eyes. And I think that's so important, right? And if we're talking about the sense that this is a serial, you've got to sort of have like bumpers, okay, of like, where does this begin and where does this end? And when we talked about before of like having this umbrella of like in plot of that, this is sort of the parameters in which, or the world in which, this is the sort of suspension of belief that we're dealing with. And then you have this open runway to be able to explore another story. So for this being a book one, it's the setup. I thought about it being from the sense of, yes, her magical ability, but I think to me it was a bigger picture of her uniqueness, because it just wasn't about her telepathy, because yes, that's part of it, and that's sort of what attracts people to her, but it really is the context of her telepathic abilities mixed with the kind of person she is and how she was raised in the South, and what she considers proper and what she considers, how her grand raised her, and all of those things sort of muddies and makes it murky when she's put in these sort of situations that she's still trying to have Southern etiquette when she's dealing with vampires trying to kill her, right? And how does she deal with that? And how does she see herself and her place in the world at large? Because Sookie doesn't just question who she is in a sort of supernatural context. She questions who she is in life. Right, because she's been trying so hard to hide herself, and almost like to minimize her footprint, so that people forget that she's not normal, and it's almost as if her dance with the supernatural, because she's almost forced to do some things, it also begins to give her a glimpse at the extent in which she can take up more space in the world. And I think that's probably my answer of how I would normally see in a romance, right? And then your answer is the way that you would look at it, in making sure that we have a very concrete and stable foundation for having a crime story. And I think as a writer, if you're dibbling and dabbling in both, or you're aiming to have this sort of dual genre story, that you got to think about both, right? You got to think about both, and you have to have a sense of both have to be secure. And I think that's why you do have such a great runway for having a serial, because you have all these little elements that you can choose, like, this is the one that I'm going to explore in this book, and this is the one that I'm going to explore in this book. And so in this book, book one, we really needed to have an opportunity to see, when we drop down in this moment, who is Sookie? Who does she think she is? Who does Bill see when he sees her essence? And who does her family see? And who does her community see? And who do the other vampires see? And all of that is sort of what we are experiencing in Dead Until Dark. That makes you either like, oh my goodness, this is too much, or like, oh yeah, sign me up for more.
Yeah. I want to just like really like zero in on something that you said, because you're kind of, so I was talking sort of about the gift and about, you know, establishing our runway for the series. But then, you know, what you were talking about, and again, we talked about this some during the plot episode as well, about Sookie is trying to find her place in a world where she feels like she doesn't fit. And that adds, so like her getting acquainted with her gift, and that, you know, that's kind of, that's character but bordering on plot stuff, right? That what you were talking about is what gives meaning to her journey with her gift, right? Because this is about a person. She's not just like, otherwise she's fine, but she has this quirk, right? No, this is a feature that is complicating her relationship to the world as a whole, and something she is trying to figure out. So this book, she gets introduced to the supernatural world, and she starts to find that she has actually a place in it, because she's kind of a supernatural creature as well. But now the question is, do I want a place in that world? And it is questionable. And sometimes she's like, oh, yes, this is it. And sometimes she's like, this is not for me, right? And it's like, oh, this is kind of gross. This is kind of creepy. And so what it's doing is, it's not just about, you know, kind of like a plot-centric, a girl and her gift kind of thing. This is about a girl trying to navigate a place in the world because of what her gift does to the way people perceive her, and then therefore her self-perception, right? So she struggled in school because of her gift, and that meant that people didn't think that she was intelligent, even though we are in her point of view, we are watching her, she's not dumb. That is a misconception, and people are misunderstanding her. But it causes conflict, right, in her self-perception, because that's what happens to us as people. When people perceive us a certain way and they put labels or expectations or, you know, anything like that on us, it will begin to conflict with what we know or think we know about ourselves, right? And what it does is it gives the gift, it's not just a gift, it's not just a plot thing, it's adding layers and depth and nuance to Sookie as a character, and that is someone we can spend multiple books with, right? That is someone who we can begin to sympathize with, and where that gift takes on new meaning of, what world do I fit in? And it seems like I'm kind of straddling both now, and I don't fit into either. And what does that mean for finding love? And what does that mean for how I engage the world around me? And now we're moving in and out of our plots of crime and romance, right? And so I'm so glad that you kind of drew attention to that, because that, I don't think we have a story without that element. The gift stuff is good, and you need that for your setup, but this is where you actually get depth and meaning out of the gift and the other parts of the story, you know?
And it's why we care. I think as you were saying that too, it made me think about, as she's navigating that and she's having to address it real time, even though the point of view, she's writing in past tense. So she even gives us a little bit of nods of, man, I wish I didn't do that, because she's still trying to resolve, how do I know things that I shouldn't know? How do I still help people that need help when I'm not supposed to know certain things? And then a graduated level of that, because we see it on different tiers, a graduated level of that is feeling like she's, I don't think she ever thinks of herself as plain, right? Like a plain Jane or anything like that. But I do on some levels feel like she does feel like that, because no one would have given her maybe romantic consideration or whatever, because she's still known as, oh, that's great. And they say it so many times, oh, that's crazy, Sookie Stackhouse, right? But then when she encounters people like Bill, and she encounters Eric, and then when she has these bouts of encountering Bill's blood, right? And how she just starts taking on this, you know, what's a glamour or whatever. But all of this to say, when you're thinking about characters and you're thinking about a protagonist, and you want that protagonist to be able to carry the weight of multiple books, and if you don't know what that multiple means, that means you really want to give yourself some room to decide. You don't have to know everything, but you want her to have enough depth that you can pluck out different instances and different scenarios, or call upon different aspects of her. And in this case, I think you're calling upon the aspect of her identity, right? This book was really about, who am I? Like, she thinks she knows, but she doesn't know. And then she was like, I'm strong and I'm smart, like really beginning to sort of internalize who she is and what does that do to everything else around her. Because in life, the moment you realize, like, I ain't taking no stuff, right? Everything has got to move or challenge or get out the way because you've established and you've adopted that truth. And that's what we see Sookie doing. And the way that it's done, she already had a sense, but it's almost like this grandiose, almost false sense that becomes a reality when she has experience and her being in certain situations, realizing, oh no, I am strong and I can do this. And even at the point of where she's about to get attacked, she don't run. She turn around like, look, you're not going to get me without me getting some good licks in first. And I'm
So
like,
good.
come on. She's like, listen, I ain't running. I might be scared, but I ain't scary. So it's about to go down. And you see that for us as readers real time. And I think that's one of those moments where you can't have that moment where we're absolutely rooting for her if we don't have the full understanding of why she's hidden for so long and why it has been vital for her to protect excuse me, when she decided to open the floodgates, and she's really has been intentional about protecting her mental space so that she doesn't encroach upon others, so that she can keep those relationships intact. But when it came to the fact of, I gotta do this or I won't be here, right? Like, it's so all of this to say, I think even though we're talking about characters and it does dance into plot, it's the fact that you've got to have a character that has layers. And we have to want to explore those layers as readers. So there's got to be these open-ended questions and these open-ended experiences that gives you the opportunity to cherry pluck them, whether it's now or later. And I really think that she would have had to sit with Sookie, because then that gives you an understanding of how do you create a Bill? How do you create a Sam? How do you create a Gran, right? How do you create the other characters that sort of color her world and how she engages with it, whether it is in the natural or supernatural?
Yeah, well, and this is actually like the perfect segue, because a question I wanted to pose to you, because you're the resident romance expert, and we have Bill and Sookie as a couple. I don't know if I have like a formalized question in my mind, but I want to know, like, what is it about Bill and like how do Bill and Sookie play off of each other, and how do Bill and Sookie come out on the page as a couple, and what is it that makes them, because what I was noticing this time when I read was all of the ways in which we see they might not be right for each other, which was so, like, the first time I read it, because he was the love interest, I was just sort of like Team Bill, I don't know. But the second time I read it, I was like, ooh, we already have some of those little flags going off of like, this might not be it, but we do need a happily for now because we're in a romance, right? And so, can you talk to me a little bit about, Bill as our first love interest, and how the relationship was sort of conveyed throughout the story? And, so Bill and Sookie as a couple, and making Bill and Sookie right enough, but then wrong in some ways for each, or seeming maybe potentially wrong for each other. Can you unpack that for me?
Yeah, and of course we can't unpack everything, but I think what this is, and this is gonna tap dance on your suitors. Like, we're laughing about it, but it really does tap dance on that suitor. So I think part of this is, like, when you think about a couple in a romance, usually what you have is like the quintessential opposites, even if there are elements about them that are the same, right? And the opposites of them should make for the fact that we would think that there's no way that it can work out. But then there's these glimpses of like, oh, but wait, but that's the same. So you have this balance of they balance each other in ways, and or they challenge each other, or they sort of call up a part of that person that really sort of exemplifies their essence versus the reality or their representative of who they are, because that's who life has required them to be. And what we are finding is both Sookie and Bill have that. Right, that Sookie is sort of operating in this thing of, if I quiet my mind and I present myself as this, that you will accept me. And when Bill sees her, he sees her essence of, what are you? I'm nothing. I am just a waiter. No, what are you? Because he sees her, it's almost like he sees her power, or he sees how someone in life will see how smart you are. You say a certain thing and they think, But what happens is, the only way that happens is that you have the right person that can call that out in them. So her relationship with Bill is sort of that calling out. For Sookie in the beginning, it was just fascination for something different, but it evolves into, it's almost like a fascination with herself, because she's different. And so what you begin to do is you get to play with these themes and these different scenarios, because all it is a mirror for the character. He's a mirror, right? He's an outward representation of her inner struggle. He's aiming to be different in a world where he can't hide it. And she's aiming to be different in a world where she thinks she can hide it and she can't. Right, we see that with the detective. I can't remember his name. The one where his family.
Andy.
Give me his name. Yes, Andy.
Yeah.
Where he's playing with her, he's toying with her, almost to the point where she thinks it's indecent. How dare you? But it's almost like the exact same thing that Bill goes through. But Bill can't hide that. He can't hide the prejudice that people have against him or the toying that they do with him because he's a vampire, or the jokes they make, or the outward things that they can do to him because he's having to live in it. So I think what happens is, when you're building these characters, you're going to have elements in them where it's almost as if that other character provides a sense of peace and a sense of, for no pun intended, quiet, where they're struggling to have a sense of normalcy. He gives her the quietness of his mind, that she can't read his thoughts. When she's with him, she can truly sleep and rest because she doesn't hear the racing of his mind. What he gets with her is sort of the quietness of the lack of judgment and the lack of having an expectation, because he is a vampire. To her, she doesn't care either way. So he gets the opportunity to have his own version of normal, and that sort of peace that your true love, right? That sense of acceptance that your true love gives you is what they're seeking out in each other. But we also see the conflicts in that. And so then it becomes this thing of, one of the elements, that people wrestle with, and readers even wrestle with, is usually the breakup scene, right? People don't want them to break up. We like them together. We think they should be together. But I always think of the breakup scene as one of the best scenes in a romance, because a love not tested isn't real, right? Because they could just live in the fairy tale of having this amazing sex, or having these encounters, falling in love. She gets her vampire, he gets her, right? And gets a little bit of the erotic parts of it along with the normalcy as much as they can. But they are tested by the fact that everyone sees this romance. And everyone sees this human with this. He can kill her. She's being naive. He's glamoring her, even though we know it's not true. And so it's being tested by society, being doubted and questioned by the ones that they love. And every time you either affirm that or not, it gives a nod to or away from that love. Like, do you want it? Are you willing to stand up for it? And what we get to see is, we get to see that on the page, and we get to experience that through the dead bodies. Right? Like,
love a cry.
Every dead body It's like, do I really want this? Right? And a step further, they have to not only say, do I really want this as in being in love with this person, but do I want this as far as being in a relationship with not just Bill, but a vampire? Of not just being in a relationship with Sookie, but a human. And is it worth it? Is it worth it? Not just in love. Like, I love you, but do I want to get all the other things that come with being in love with you? So it just increases the stakes, going back to what we talk about in plot. It takes it not just from a love, hate, and do I want to be in this relationship or not, but then their association with each other is escalated by the fact that it is a life or death, because he is a vampire and his people are vampires. And one last thing, and then I know you have something else. The one thing that I don't think we didn't get to touch on in plot, but that it happens here. It's like this, the dynamics of their, it's gotta come back. But the dynamics of their relationships within their communities also increases those stakes. And I think we did touch on it now that I think about it. And there is another part of it that has got to come back. But we see that. And that's what we see in the romantic context, right? And then it's agitated by the crime context, the romantic relationship is.
Yeah, right. And so that's where it's, again, and something I think she does really well is that it's not, the complications aren't one-sided. It's not just what it's like for Sookie to be in a relationship with a vampire and the complications of relationships with a vampire for Sookie. The complications are for Bill as well, being in a relationship with a human. So first of all, some vampires are not taking kindly to his relationship with a human, which puts him at risk because there are older vampires than him who could kill him or beat him up, or, it's like, he is not the strongest guy in the room because vampire strength is dictated by age. And there's just a fact of the context. There are vampires older than Bill that exist, and Eric is one of them. But also, right, Bill has to feed sometimes, and he can't always feed on Sookie. It's again, because he risks weakening her and or turning her by accident into a vampire. So now we kind of have some jealousy coming in, but also there is a literal risk to his life because vampires can still die because of the hatred that humans have for vampires. And we see that around the time of the breakup, right? Like, humans might get an idea in their head to kill him as a vampire because he's in a relationship with a human. So now he's at risk, right? So we're seeing the complications on all sides and from all sides to the relationship. And so again, it does really serve that. And I think it makes kind of a nice potential segue into the question of suitors, right? In the serial, because what we need to see in this book, because we're going to be in a serial, is by the end of the story, our couple is together, but the question of whether or not this is worth it has not been answered. It is still kind of up in the air. So they're together, but the potential for complications we are super, super aware of. And we're going to continue to explore those throughout the rest of the series. And so what we have in this story, so we see the complications that are for Sookie and Bill, and we get contextual complications, and we even get a little bit of like just interpersonal stuff that we can see where it could be a problem, particularly in that Bill is a little bit uncommunicative. So he is going to do stuff and he's not going to give Sookie the details, and you just know that's going to be a problem because he's like, I have to do this thing for us, and she's like, what are you doing? And he's like, well, I don't want to talk about it until I've done it, until it's a done deal. He's gone for like a while. Sookie gets into a load of trouble while he's gone, which, by the way, that is the time for your hero at the mercy of the villain scene. That's when right. The very powerful love interest is off screen and can't save them, and they have to save themselves. Just pro tip for you there. That one's for free. And so when he comes back and he's like, I fixed everything. Look what I did. And Sookie is in the hospital, and she's like, that's really nice for you, Bill. Maybe this is going to be okay. Maybe it's not, right? And so we have that kind of open-ended question, right? And so then what we have in this story is there's some competition for Sookie's affection. Because one of the things that I love that Charlaine Harris did in this book is Sookie is not the there's sort of this I guess it's a trope in romance, maybe it's more of like a cliche that people sort of laugh at. It's like the main character is like, I'm not very pretty and I'm super thin, but everybody wants me. And it's sort of like, everyone like kind of starts to roll their eyes a little bit. Sookie, that is not Sookie's problem. In the very beginning of the story, she's like, I don't get dates, not because I'm not hot, because I've got boobs, I've got a butt, and my hair is blonde, and I look real good all the time and everything. It's because I'm telepathic, and it makes me act weird, and so people think I'm weird. And so in the supernatural world, the creatures are attracted to her because she's hot, and she's a telepath, which makes her interesting. She's sort of like a novelty even for them, right? And so we get these different suitors who are attracted to her, and they're kind of all throwing their hats in the ring. So when we see that there are problems with Bill, we see that there are other people, creatures in the world who are interested in her, and that's what's honestly going to create this sort of sexy adventure that we're going to get throughout the series, where these are not the only suitors. These are probably the main ones, but we get introduced to some other people who are attracted to her. So what we see is that Sookie has options, right? It's not just Bill that's on the table here. And so as the world gets bigger, as Sookie uncovers that there is this bigger universe for her to explore, it also means that if Bill isn't right for her, if this thing with Bill isn't like, he's not the only option here. And so she's going to meet all of the different kinds of people and essentially all these different opportunities that Sookie has to actually find love, where up until the first book, she had none, because everyone was like, nah, Sookie's weird. No, thank you. And even she can't really sustain a relationship because she can read their thoughts, and that's very uncomfortable. It makes it real hard to have a relationship with someone where you're constantly getting a feed in their head. So we're getting that setup for so where we see the gaps in her relationship with Bill, there are other fellas who are ready to step in and say, that's okay, baby, I don't have that problem,
I think it is the quintessential old lady Rachel, the fact that you call them suitors. Because I'm just like, listen, she would say that. What I will say, and it actually does not go to characters per se, but it does go to plot, because actually it's marries the two. I think also what that makes it, the way that I see this is that it makes it so that at the end of the story, it's not just whether the love is worth it, but whether this is the love for her. And having that question, it opens up the gate. It goes back to our runway, right? The fact that you call, them throwing their names in the hat, they want to be on her dance card. You're not the only one with old people.
That was the best. I love that metaphor so much. Oh my God. Just spoke to my little old lady heart. My 1800 self was like, oh my Lord, my dance card.
Your dance card. So they're making themselves known, but what that also does, it gives you opportunity. Now, what I absolutely love that we can't overlook, because not only is the only way the opportunity can be there is if you put it there, right? So her writing the story to where that there are viable reasons why. Listen, Bill needs to be sucker punched and a karate chopped, because why would you leave? Like, I'm just good, girl, when you did the sound, I was like, he sounded just like that in my head. I just wanted to clock him. Like, where are you going? Get your butt back here. Answer the phone, right? It's just like, but having those different moments, right? You can see how, well, maybe Sam is a better fit, or maybe Eric. And having that little bit of a question just makes it so that you have opportunities for additional books. And again, this is not us talking about plot per se, but it's like, as a writer, are you setting things up in such a way that you give yourself options while not faltering on the promise that you are giving your readers? because you want to make sure that that promise is ironclad and they can trust you with that promise. But if you make it so that you also give yourself options, that's when you get to play with characters. That's where you get to have a shifter that can turn into whatever he saw last, right? It's not just a werewolf. I mean, and when he said I keep a border collie on the table open, so I thought that was so good. So the point is, like, you are doing yourself a favor, and your future self will be glad that you did. And I think having those suitors as a category is important. And the last thing about that to me, because I've only read through book almost 3, I started 3, is you really don't fully know. Like, you kind of know what Sookie wants in general, but we don't know if really the thing is to find her person. Because Sookie wasn't going out there to say, I want to know how grand my gifts are. That wasn't her goal. I think her goal really is to find her person. I think when we get to the end of this journey for Sookie, it's going to be being able to find love and settle down and live in her family house and raise some kids in Bonton. I think that's really what we don't know yet, because that's not the time. And I think there's something about the potential of that. It also pulls you through to the future books, because like, you want Sookie to be happy. You've seen what Sookie been through. You've seen the past hurts that Sookie has been through. And this makes it so that we care about what happens to Sookie, and we're like, girl, if you don't quit being silly, we want to clock her sometimes too, but we want to see her happy because we feel like she's owed that. And now it's about who or what are the circumstances that will allow her to have her true happily ever after. So happy for now, we'll make do with that, because there are so many options. And then it's like, for the author, this becomes like a choose your own adventure, because you can pluck and then just go down that path and then kind of bring them back to ground zero, and then go out again, pluck it up, come back to ground zero, which is a bon ton, in that environment. So yeah, I think that having suitors makes it for a very interesting story.
Yeah, and you honestly, again, if you're gonna do, and this is where knowing what you're trying to achieve is essential. If you are not doing a fun, sexy serial where our protagonist is gonna get to, honestly, sample all kinds of goods that exist in the world. If that is not your story, do not set us up for that story. So the thing is, right, so for example, in The Things We Never Got Over, Naomi and Knox go together, and we know it, and we will not be happy any other way. There is no other ending that your reader will accept beside Naomi and Knox together. And so if that's the kind of story you're telling, we're going to see, we'll say, problems arise in the relationship, but we want to see those problems getting resolved, right? We want to see them being able to overcome their differences, and as they're growing, right, they're able to, not that no problems exist anymore, but that they're able to understand how to navigate those problems. Mm-hmm. That's not what this book is meant to do, because we're not meant to say, oh, Bill is the one and no one else will do. We're supposed to say, oh, maybe it's Bill, but maybe it's not. Sookie doesn't know yet, and neither do we, but we want to know. So we keep showing up, and we get to see different chemistry with different characters as Sookie herself is expanding her world and coming to understand what she wants, what she needs. Like, this is right. But you have to know that. So we're talking about this because this is a serial where this is going to happen. Again, it also leaves it open so that it can stay sexy and exciting with different love interests without feeling kind of like icky. But if that's not what you're doing, then don't do it. You know what I mean? And so that's really important, to be aware of what you're trying to do. But I also, just one last thing, I also want to say, she still closed the loop on this book. We still have happy for now. We still resolved our case, but we know that there's more to come. So, right, we still get a sense of closure with this book, even though all of our threads haven't been fully answered. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but I will say that knowing that this book is set in a Southern sort of capacity, and that is sort of the lens in which we encounter these characters, it's important that even though there may be options, that she's not seen as loosey-goosey, because that will go against cultural norms as well, right?
Exactly.
And so even when some of those lines are getting close to being crossed or certain things happen, she snapped back because of her loyalty to Bill. And so that's another part that must be sort of intact, or we won't be on board for the journey because it makes you look disloyal, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a very fine line. And I think that in a way that we don't fully sort of accept that it could be someone else just yet. We are questioning Bill, because Bill does look a little cinnamon roll-ish. I'm not saying he's squishing, but he could have a little more
next
alpha
to Eric,
in this way.
all of a sudden, right? I mean, Eric he's got all alpha energy. He's charming. He's much more forward, right? I mean, so that competition, right?
Or even Sam, because I felt like for Sam, and y'all, we may be that when we do these, we can only talk about the main protagonist. But even for Sam, to me, Sam just seems like, whenever you have a true love triangle, the people like to just pit it as, oh, she has options. But it really is about having options that could serve them, that seem like they can serve them better, right? Mm-hmm. Sam, she can go out in the daytime. She can go to a date. She can go to the members of the whatever meeting. They could go have some lunch or brunch or whatever. But we got to wait till Bill get up. Bill is asleep, right? So half of her life. And
he'll die if he comes out.
We're not laughing at Bill, but Bill got some limitations. So part of this is the fact of when you have a true love triangle, it's the fact that there's a potential that could be a better life. Now, the capacity in which better is determined is different. And that's what makes it so like, well, I mean, we like Bill, but, right? And I think just having that slight hesitation, it doesn't even have to be a full one, a slight hesitation, a little bit of light coming through the crack is enough to sort of pull us forward. And even at the end of Sookie being very resolved that this is the relationship that she's in. But you see this in other books like this too. You see the same thing in the Stephanie Plum books. It's the same thing. That's why she can bounce back and forth. And each of them serves a purpose. And not only that, you see there are times when they come together to cover Sookie and to protect Sookie. And so that's another one of those moments where you're like, oh yeah, like he could be the one for her. He could be, because he's going to do whatever it takes, even if it means working with Sam, working with Bill, and Bill working with Sam. And even when Bill said, if anything happens, go to Sam. Mm-hmm. So we see that, and I think you see it done in a way that feels like, oh, okay, this can be executed in any environment. It just so happens it's in this one. So yes, definitely for the Suitors.
And that's something, again, if this is a less common plot style, I think I don't see this kind of serial style as much anymore. That might not be that might just be a matter of exposure for me. But it seems like it's kind of a less common style of like publishing stories anymore. But would you say, is it big in indie still?
I think it still is going to be there, because this would be something, number one, you're going to see love triangles in almost everything in general. Like it's in romance a lot. Now, we don't have this open loop, but it is open until it's closed, right? You're probably going to also see it when you have cozies, because cozies are just like this story in that you have to run with this protagonist. And so usually it's this thing of like the need to explore their personal life supersedes that love life dynamic, but having options makes for having more opportunities for stories. Right. Yeah. And the fact that different people have different skill sets and have different needs at different times. And so it may not be that it's a constant thing, but I think it's a thing that you can't shelf if you want to have something that, again, I would just still do a really great a nod to the Stephanie Plum, that you have 30 some odd books, or in this case, if it's 10 books with the same people. You've got to have those open windows that you can be able to explore, and that when you explore them, it's for a good reason and it seems logical. It doesn't seem like, oh, she's been wishy-washy. So I think that's the other part. Like, you really got to establish it with a sense of a real strong spine, and you've got to do it in a way where we as readers would be like, oh, that makes sense. Right. Like, we got to be like, oh, yeah, like you would go to Sam for that. Bill is in the ground. Right. It's during the day. Or you would go to Bill for this because it's dealing with his, right, that it feels logical, but that you're exploring other dynamics of why this can be a pro or a con for them to be a true happily ever after.
Yes, which actually, I'm glad that you said that, because I was sort of like, I was stuck thinking about just serial kind of like romance. Of like that have this very romance forward kind of plot or aspect to them. But you started saying that, and I was like, well, duh, like I literally work in crime. We do serials like that all the time with a protagonist who's our investigator, and every story we've got a new crime, we've got some holdover cast, and we've got some new cast coming in. And so even if you're working with a crime serial and you want to incorporate romantic subplots, right, where there's potential love interests and you kind of have this movement, the considerations are the same. So you need a sense of logic to the love interest. So you can, but anymore it doesn't work as well. If you go James Bond style, it's just like every book there's like some new woman, and James Bond is like, this is just what I do. I'm James Bond. We're going to have sex. It's going to be fun. And then we're going to move on. You don't like, that's not as much of a like satisfactory, sort of setup in your serial novels, particularly with your crime like investigative, your crime novel protagonists. But you do have the opportunity to explore relationships and to kind of have that where your protagonist is meeting different people. There's a chance for them to find someone. You're opening up the loops of, potential cracks in the relationships. Or I even think about the Cormoran Strike series by Robert Galbraith, where you have this kind of super like slow burn, drawn out kind of love story that happens between the protagonist and his like main his assistant. But you're gonna need that. You're gonna need the logic. You're gonna need to keep those loops open, right? Those questions open without falling into disloyalty, because that will put people off really, really quickly, unless you're writing some other kind of story that's, about your whatever. Does that make sense? But like when you have a serial protagonist in crime, you can also explore those love stories and have those romantic subplots.
Yeah, but I think this is where you really want to, as a writer, have your own personal comps, because I would think you do see it a lot more often, because think about thrillers, think about the James Patterson stories, think about, you have it, but the difference there is the focus is on the crimes and not so much the evolution of him as a character. Therefore, the relationships are also relegated to that scope. So he could have multiple if he wanted to, right? But what happens is making it so that those relationships represent some sort of a notch forward in his closer relationship with humanity. And it's just represented in a physical relationship. But in this case, where you have that this is a dual genre sort of story, they're matching pace. And so that's where we've got to be mindful of that. And again, I think if we get to the end and the ultimate story is Sookie finding her person, then her age and her limited experiences in love and her limited exposure because she's from a small town, and the fact that she was thought as crazy, so she was isolated, makes sense that you would want to have exploration, right? Mm-hmm. Because you didn't have that in your younger years because you was crazy Sookie. Right. And now you find Sookie. You the Sookie who.
That's right. Hell yeah.
She who runs with vampires. You know what I'm saying? So even as a person, you would think, oh, that would make sense, right? That you have this limited scope, and that becomes a part of her journey, right? A part of her exploration of her womanhood, of how she interacts with others, of how she interacts with her family, of how she interacts with her community, and now how she interacts and is seen by the supernatural community. And so you have to know that, though, because it would be easy to fluff it up.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of things. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think that's exactly the thing. And I think that's really what I wanted to get at is know what you're trying to do and do it with intention. Right? Be cognizant of what you're doing, because I think that, and again, people get away with it all the time, but I think that it's a missed opportunity when you're like, well, just chuck in a love, a romantic subplot because, and it's easy to do that and it feel kind of cheap, rather than because even if it is, going to be just like you said, you've got a serial protagonist and his growth isn't really that important. So if it's a new woman every book, it's sort of whatever. And it's not as important, particularly to the audience, right? They're not going to be put off by that. It's just part of the series. But then it's a missed opportunity if it's just a thing you're throwing in there. And so doing it with intention and being cognizant of what you are trying to accomplish, and again, moving with intention toward accomplishing that end, that's really the point here. So knowing what you're after and doing it intentionally, which is why having those personal comps is essential. If you're going for the serial protagonist who doesn't, particularly grow in any way and it's just a bunch of adventures, get your comps for that. If you want to have this more sort of personal exploration of self and, like you said, womanhood or, selfhood or whatever, get your comps for that, but know what you're after and do it on purpose.
I totally agree. And I think that's a good place for us to place this, because we can talk about a lot of these characters, but I think that is one of the things that this book does well. And I would also say that that's where this book is almost like a shining example, because there's not a lot in this space that have done it and done it well. To have the longevity and probably again why it was picked up to turn into a television series. And so I would say that as you're doing this and you're looking at this, being very aware, and I think the more aware that you are, it also gives you opportunities to continue the series, right? So that you have options that does not alienate people who fall in love with Bill or really like Sam or really think Eric could be the one, or whatever, right? I think it's just becomes a really great character sort of playground to play in, and that you can pick up and put down. And the one thing that I will say with this as well, I think that's why how she handled Bill coming and going. Listen, I feel like he felt a little bit flaky, but we're not gonna call him flaky, but kind of we are. It made it so that we wouldn't get too committed to Bill.
Yeah.
Him coming and going and us having to get used to Sookie figuring it out on her own and in her own, having her own agency and learning the limits in which she was going to interact and engage with the world and being able to protect and stand up for herself makes it so that this isn't about Bill and Sookie. It's about Sookie. And I
Yeah,
think that's
so true.
the most important part of this. It's like, look, like, let's keep the main thing the main thing. This is close, and she's still going to have a romance in here. But this is about Sookie, and this is about, now granted, her being in a relationship with Bill is going to get her into all kinds of situations and troubles, and it's going to force her to really grow in her abilities and her skill set. But I think we still know without a shadow of a doubt that at the end of the day, Sookie is the one that got Sookie. And we don't doubt that for 1 second in this story.
Yeah, yeah. And just the last thing I want to say about to kind of put that pin in, this being about Sookie, and again, about making sure that you're very conscious about that disloyalty, that issue of disloyalty when you have a character who's going through sort of just exploration in the world and her sexuality and her life and finding romance, blah, blah, blah. When Bill and Sookie are together, that Sookie is not looking at anybody, so she will notice that someone is attractive, and other people will make moves on her, and she will feel the romantic tension of that, which is again how we get the introduction of the other love interests, who are, again, putting their hat in the ring. But Sookie doesn't get involved with anyone while she's involved with Bill, right? So that's where you keep that boundary of not being, not getting into territory, so that's a really important thing when you're looking at something like that, where she does actually stay loyal to Bill. And I think that's important because if you're dabbling in romance, because we are still mystery and paranormal romance, cheating is almost universally off the table, and that's something you got to be really careful with.
Mm-hmm. I would also say that I think in some places in this story, the author made that creative choice, and it was almost at the cost of the other characters. And I think that's the other thing where you just gotta weigh your pros and cons as the creative who's writing the story, whether that's the cost that you want to take. The reason why I feel like Bill is a little bit squishy is because he has some little shady behavior, but we needed that shady behavior to be able to give Sookie the separation, to introduce the potential before the potential fell off and Bill came back. You needed that dance, but it does not come without a cost. And so you just have to pick. Now, when you're picking, don't pick just about what you want, but about the longevity of what you want to do and the overall scope of your story, and about the promise that you have made to your readers and what you want them to experience in their reading journey with you, that series, and that character. So you are weighing quite a bit. But I think that's the benefit that you get if you set it up right, that you can run with that baby, because that's the foundation for multiple books. But that also is why it's so challenging. It's not a standalone. You don't get to do a do-over with the next one, right? This one will stand, and it's built upon that. And so I think that's the other part about it that makes it just a little bit more of a challenge. But if you give it its just due, it will pay in spades, right? It will pay in dividends, like ongoing through to the end. And I think that's why it's worth it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I know that we are knocking on needing to close this out. We did not get into all of the characters, whether you're talking about the victims. We've talked a lot about the love interest in a sense of both Bill and Sam. Was there any other elements that you wanted to bring to the table before we close out this episode when it comes to characters in Dead Until Dark?
It worked out really well that in plot, I kind of talked already about the pool of suspects. So we kind of already covered that. I think one of the things is some of our reoccurring characters are not super well defined in this book. And it is because we're going to meet more throughout the series. And it's also, think about the fact that Sookie doesn't even really have a best friend, right? That role is not, she has Arlene, who's the closest thing she has. But even that relationship rate is kind of iffy. And so it's giving her the opportunity again to go on that exploration. But it also means our secondary cast is not as vivid as what we see in the Things We Never Got Over, because that world is going to keep pushing outward and expanding. And part of the fun is the new characters we're going to meet, and then we'll see them kind of coming back around. So, I think that the main thing, when I'm thinking about, what writers should be really having in the forefront of their mind, is, knowing what your story is about, right? What you are meaning to explore within the story, and using your external plot, right, and your internal plot to weave in to the character, to the nuances of your character, using the plot to pull on different aspects of your character and make those relevant, and make that exploration relevant to the story itself, and add those layers of meaning, and then to, again, know what you're after and to do it intentionally and to go get your comps for it, because there's a lot of things that you can do. Knowing what those are, like knowing what you want to do and what, again, promise you're going to make to your readers, is what is going to make the difference really between it working for them and it not working for them.
One of the things that, like, as you're saying that, my mind sort of was dancing around, and the fact that you have so many victims in this story, I think that is a reason why you wouldn't want to overplay your secondary cast. It will get too muddy, right? It will become almost too convoluted. And this wasn't a long book, right? This would, if she would have done that in the sort of, like, let's think about it in the sense when we were in things we never got over, the guy that owned the coffee shop, right? We don't go into a whole bunch about him, and she sort of does that, but leaves room in here to be able to explore them more. But because we had so many victims, and to be able to keep the pace and also explore the sort of, like, this really was world building, right? It just was all about, where are we? And I think the fact that she's introduced them enough, it's almost like putting them on the page and like put a pin in it kind of way, so that they don't just come out of left field. But we don't have time for that right now. We'll come back to that. But I agree. And so with that said, everyone, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. This, as you can see, is a very dynamic story when it comes to characters. If you are looking to build a single protagonist serial or ongoing series, man, if you want to look for a book one to really cement and sort of create this strong foundation, this is the one. And even though we didn't go into a lot of with the secondary characters, you can see that she really did just enough to be able to really cement what we can expect from this world, and she delivered, so that we are on hook for book two. And I think even if you don't get into all the nuances of everyone, but you do that, then you've done your job. I do think that's a bare minimum, but you've done your job. And so, so with that said, any final thoughts before we close out, Rachel?
No, Lord, we're knocking on the door of hour 20. Even if I did, I wouldn't say them.
I'm going to throw her away with that. With that said, thank you so much for joining us. If you haven't done so already, don't forget to leave a review, give us a 5-star, and come over to storydeepdive.com and leave us a comment. Have you read this story? Is this something that you enjoy? What are you learning about exploring your characters from this discussion? And we will see you back on the next episode as we go into the editor's takes of our takeaways for this book. It has been juicy, and as you see, we are absolutely loving it, and we hope that you are loving it as well. So we are out. We'll see you in the next episode, and as always, happy writing. Goodbye.